Everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we'll be discussing about growth hormone. Okay, in this brief video we'll be talking about everything related to growth hormone you should know, and how to perform it you can write down also. So these are notes type. So what is growth hormone? Growth hormone is secreted by anterior pituitary, right? Anterior pituitary, it's one of the hormones secreted by anterior pituitary, right? So anterior pituitary secretes some hormone in response to some other hormone secreted by hypothalamus. Okay, so this point should be clear to you. Whatever hormone you get in your exam, you have to write like this. So this flow chart showing the interaction between hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, right? And ultimately that hormone, whatever it is, this hormone, this will act on some target organ via circulating in blood, right? Okay, so whenever you get growth hormone, what you have to write is, you have to first tell this axis. So this is kind of H, P, and here the target organ will be, it will not be a particular fixed organ like in thyroid, like in adrenal gland. So it's nothing like this. So this is hypothalamus pituitary axis only, right? Now, first of all, to understand growth hormone, we have to see that what can stimulate the release of growth hormone, right? Okay, so growth hormone can be released if we have decreased blood sugar level or fasting, right? Increase amino acid or decrease in fatty acids, exercise and stresses. Don't mug up these things. Okay, we have to understand the concept. Actually, when we'll be talking about functions of growth hormone, you'll be very clear about every term here. Fine, so just try to remember here only first thing, that it is released when there is decrease in blood glucose concentration. Fine. Okay, so whenever there is we are in fasting condition or decrease in blood glucose concentration, it stimulate what? It stimulate hypothalamus, right? Hypothalamus releases GHRH, which is called GH, yani growth hormone releasing hormone. So growth hormone releasing hormone, it stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete growth hormone. Fine. So this is just an idea. So what if you get regulation of growth hormone question only? So what you have to write is, you have to just explain the same axis. So whenever growth hormone increases, or there is one more factor which is, we'll be talking about it later, but this factor increases. So these two things ultimately inhibit hypothalamus, or it stimulate hypothalamus to release one more factor, which is GHIH. So growth hormone inhibiting hormone, that is. Fine. So there are two hormones released by hypothalamus. Whenever stimulation is required, GHRH is released. Whenever inhibition is required, GHIH is released. Fine. So that's all about regulation. You can comment here. Okay. Then is how basically it acts on cell and how it plays some roles. Fine. So GH, basically growth hormone, it acts on some GH receptors. For example, liver is shown here. So this is the GH hormone acting on some GH receptors, right? So via Jack state pathway, ultimately it is leading to some mRNA synthesis, right? So this is called signal transduction. Fine. So after that, ultimately mRNA is synthesized, so some protein is going to be synthesized. Fine. So this synthesized protein is called here IGF, insulin-like growth factor 1. Fine. And that insulin-like growth factor, these factors enters the blood and play some role. We'll be talking about this in functions. So ultimately via Jack-Stat pathway, if someone asks you the signal transduction mechanism of GH, so it's Jack-Stat pathway leading to mRNA synthesis, right? Okay. Likewise, it acts on adipocyte on some receptors, and it lead to some protein synthesis. And here the protein is HSL, which is hormone sensitive lipases. Okay. So lipases are active. That means it breaks down fat into glucose. Okay, which enters into blood. So this is how it acts on adipocyte and play some role. Okay. So that's all about say functions. Now let's see functions very clearly, that if we get functions of growth hormone in exam, so how you have to write this answer, right? So you have to answer it like this. So first macronutrients title will be there, then depending on other organs you have to make some list. Okay, so let's talk about first macronutrients. So we know that whenever decrease in glucose concentration occur, it increases the blood glucose level, right? So for carbohydrate, we know this is, it increases the blood glucose level, so it is called diabetogenic. Fine. So how it increases the blood glucose level? Either the glucose use will be reduced or glucose release will be more, right? So increase in glucose release from liver and decrease in glucose use by cell. Okay, so that's all about carbohydrate. What about fats? So fats, we have seen that on adipocyte it increase lipolysis. Fine. So lipolysis, whenever lipolysis is there will be increase in fatty acids. So what can be stimulus? Whenever there is decrease in fatty acid, growth hormone is increased. So stimulus is decrease in fatty acids. Fine. And ultimately lipolysis it is doing increase in fatty acids are there. That means fatty acids are used for energy. And how? That will be by gluconeogenesis. So fats will be converted into glucose for energy, right? Okay, so that's all about fats. Next, coming to proteins. So proteins, people, you don't have to remember this thing, but you know that growth hormone is obviously leading to our growth, and growth is obviously via protein synthesis everywhere. So increase in protein synthesis, the anabolic in nature, right? It stimulates erythropoiesis as well. Now coming to liver. So we have seen that via some transcription pathway there is release of IGF. So it increase gluconeogenesis, means glucose formation is more, and increase IGF-1 production. Insulin like growth factor is produced. So what this IGF do? You should know this thing. So this IGF, whenever in blood there is increase in amino acids present, okay, so that is also a stimulus for GH secretion. Whenever there is increase in amino acids, wise basically to synthesize protein, these amino acids will be used, and we know that protein synthesis occur because of GH. So what will be stimulus next? There will be increase in amino acids. So what happens is they takes up these amino acids, transfer to muscle and increase protein synthesis in muscle. So muscle growth is done by GH, right? It enters it basically acts on some receptors on bone, and it increase osteoblast formation, osteoclast formation, and increase collagen formation. So for bone growth it is responsible. For cartilage, basically interstitial tissue growth is also important. So it stimulates cartilage. It increase chondroblast, increase size and differentiation of chondroblast. So ultimately interstitial tissue growth is increased and hair bone growth is increased. So ultimately this is overall responsible for growth. In adipocyte we know that it increase lipolysis, and in muscles it increase amino acid uptake and do muscle growth. So that we know. And the last is it increase milk production. So that's how you have to perform if you get only function of growth hormone. Okay, now let's talk about applied aspect. Okay, so coming to applied aspect of growth hormone, so what you have to